Now let's start with the forward chaining proof. Now from the fact that we have the clause or we have the fact. See, we always start with facts in case of forward chaining. So we start with this fact, enemy nono comma America, and so this is a fact that we will use, and we'll use a rule. The rule that we will use is enemy x comma America implies hostile x. Now we'll use the substitution. It's very important that you write all the steps clearly. So we use the substitution. X is substituted by no. This is the substitution theta 1. Okay. So with this substitution, what we infer? We infer that hostile no. Okay, when you substitute no over here, so we apply, basically there are few things that I am applying directly over here. So here this can also be called a substitution, and it is also universal instantiation. Because of universal instantiation, what do you mean by this instantiation? Basically in the rules, the rule was for all x enemy x, okay, for all x enemy x comma America implies hostile x. It is true for all x. So I am using a particular instance of x, a particular substitution of x, that is x is equal to no. Okay, and along with this, now I am also using modus ponens, that is if p implies q and p is true, so then q has to be true. So I am using generalized modus ponens, or simply modus ponens. As you know, generalized modus ponens is when the clause P can contain multiple individual smaller clauses which are combined together, and when all of them are true, then we can say that the Q is also true in that case. In general, so it is modus ponens. Okay, so we have inferred that no is hostile. Now next we can use the rule. Okay, we can use the rule. Now we have there exist x. Okay, so there is an existential rule, right? So there exists x, missile x, and owns no comma x. So there exists such x. Now for removing the universal quantifier, we had used universal instantiation. To remove the existential quantifier, we have to use skolemization. We use skolemization, that is say x equal to m1, and this m1 is a Skolem constant. Basically what we are saying is, we are saying there exists one such x, at least one x. Okay, so there is at least one x, right? So say that x is m1, so it's no longer a variable. Let's say that at least one x, that is m1. So let's say x is equal to m1. Okay, so now therefore what we are saying is, we'll remove the existential quantifier and we'll simply say that missile m1 and owns no comma m1. We can also separate both of these. We can separate these into two facts now. Okay, we can separate these into two separate facts, and we can say that one of the facts is missile m1, because it does not contain a variable any longer. We can say that it's a fact. Okay, so this is, let's say, fact, okay, whatever, fact 1 and fact 2. We can break this into two facts. Okay, owns no comma m1. It no longer contains any variable. M1 is not a variable. M1 is a hypothetical missile, hypothetical substitution, or hypothetical M1. At least one. Okay, there was at least one x for which this is true. So let that at least one wala x be M1. So that is M1. Okay, so now we have these. So now we'll use the rule again. For all x, missile x implies weapon x, right? So again we'll use substitution. We'll substitute and we'll call the substitution as theta 2. The substitution is x is substituted by m1. X is substituted by m1. So we'll say that we have performed universal instantiation. This is true for all x, but we are taking one particular value of x, that is m1. So if it's true for all x, it has to be true for m1 as well. So using universal instantiation, we can say that missile m1 implies weapon m1. Now based on what we have already proved, okay, you can number these facts. So based on fact 1, you can say that this is true. So this is true from fact 1. So therefore you can say that using modus ponens, you can say that weapon 1 is also true. Weapon M1 is also true. So you can call it as fact 3, let's say. Okay, so what do we have till now? Let me call this fact 0. Okay, we started with this, right? Fact 0 is hostile no. Then fact 1 was missile M1. Fact 2 is owns no, comma M1. And based on the fact 1, we created this fact 3, which is weapon M1. Okay, now we know that missile M1. Okay, so now for all x, missile x and owns no, comma x implies cells west, comma x, comma no. Okay, now we already know that missile x is true. We know that owns no, comma. Okay, from fact 1 and 2, we know that missile M1 is true and owns no, comma M1 is true. So we can say that, we can visually, we can see that we can easily prove the left hand side of this. So we can apply modus ponens. If we use the substitution, theta 3, that substitution is x is substituted by m1. Okay, so if I do that, and also I use universal instantiation, if it's true for all x, that means it has to be true for x equal to m1. So using universal instantiation, I'm using one particular instance of x, that is x is equal to m1. Okay, so then that means missile m1 and owns no, comma m1. So this is true. This is true from fact 1 and fact 2. This is true from fact 1 and fact 2. So that means basis modus ponens, okay, cells west, comma m1, comma no has to be true, because if x is substituted by m1, it will be substituted throughout, right? So we'll substitute on the right hand side as well. So using modus ponens, we get the fact that cells west, comma m1, comma no. So this will call as fact 4. Okay, now finally, coming to the most important rule. For all x, for all y, for all z, American X and weapon Y and hostile Z and cells X, Y, Z implies criminal X. So what all substitutions will we have to use? American West is a fact which was there in our fact table, right? Which was there in our fact base even before we started with the proof. Weapon Y, okay. So I will call American West, okay. So therefore what I will do is I will use this substitution, okay. So I will use the substitution that, okay, let's call it theta 4. This is the fourth substitution we are using. X should be substituted with West, Y, the weapon, should be substituted by M1, and Z, the person, Z is the hostile nation, which should be substituted by no. So with this substitution, what we have on the left hand side is, and of course we are using universal instantiation as well because it's true for all x, so it should be true for specific values of x, y and z as well. So we'll use universal instantiation and we'll say that American West and weapon M1 and hostile no implies criminal West is true. And now we only have to prove that this is true. Now this is true from the knowledge base. So this is the knowledge base fact. Weapon M1 was a fact that we proved as fact 3, right? So this is fact 3. Okay, this was KB fact 0. This is fact 3. Hostile no is also what we inferred as fact 0. So this is inside this fact 0 is after we started proving it, right? This was a given. American West was a given in the question itself. Okay, so when you combine all these three are together, therefore left hand side is true. All these three are true, therefore left hand side has to be true. That means the right hand side, P implies Q, P is true, that means Q also has to be true. So by modus ponens, criminal West is true. Okay, so this is which is the goal. So hence proved. Now is it necessary that you always start with the same path? It's not necessary. Okay, so instead of starting with enemy no, America, okay, instead of starting with this particular thing, that is enemy no, America implies hostile no, I could have started with existential. Okay, I could have started with this first. Okay, I could have started with Skolemization first, and these would have been the initial facts. So I can start at any point. Okay, the only thing is when you are combining two rules together, just make sure that you are able to apply modus ponens. That is it true that the left hand side becomes true and therefore we can prove the right hand side. Okay, sometimes it can also be modus tollens. That means if P implies Q, then if Q is false, okay, sometimes in rare occasions it can also be modus tollens. That is, if P implies Q and if Q is false, that means P also has to be false. So modus tollens can also be necessary in some rare cases. So that's it.